morning's front pages now, and some of the inside pages too. I'm joined, pleased to say, by the journalists and broadcasters Badisha and Thomas Copeland. Badisha, Thomas, good morning to you. Hope you're having a nice weekend so far. Let's start off with you, Thomas, if we can. You picked out the front page of the Sun. And it's we've got it there on the screen. Time is the headline, an umpire calling that, but it was a judge who calls time on Boris Becker yesterday, sentencing him to 2.5 years in prison.
That's right. I mean, it's on the front of the papers today, and you've been reporting it lots as well. This name, Boris Becker, it's just iconic. I'm a bit of a baby, actually. I mean, I was born less than 1 year before he retired, and yet the name Boris Becker is just, it's so synonymous with tennis. I'm not a huge tennis fan, but if you'd asked me as somebody, not really involved in the sport, to name top 5 tennis players, he would 100% have been in that group of people. So for a generation of people watching this, there's a certain amount of sympathy and goodwill attached to that, and memories of that generation of watching Boris Becker on centre court at Wimbledon all those years ago. But when you look at the details of this case, the picture that emerges is quite clearly of a man knowingly doing what amounts to stealing from other people. And I think when stardom and money and fame, and also borrowing from big banks and yachts and villas, all becomes involved, you start to sort of almost forget that, there are victims to this sort of thing, failing to pay your creditors, as was the case for Boris Becker, to the tune of 2.5 million. It's a crime, and it's not a victimless one, and there are people who are owed debts as a consequence of him hiding his assets from the trustees of his bankruptcy estate. So the sad thing about all of this, of course, is that it was so unnecessary. There are so many former athletes who've led glittering careers in TV commentary and in coaching, and he did a little bit of both of those. And indeed, that period of time in the early part of your life when you are a huge sports star can set you up for the rest of the life. For Boris, clearly not the case. I mean, I was reading in the last couple of, read this morning and yesterday, some accounts of the kind of lifestyle that he led, and the opulence is just jaw-dropping. So, I'd have sympathy if it weren't for the fact that, one, the details of the case appear to suggest this was all fairly deliberate. I mean, Boris seemed to know a good deal about where these assets were being hidden and had been involved in hiding them from the trusteeship of his bankruptcy estate. And two, he'd been here before, 2002, being warned a suspended sentence from the German government for tax evasion. The good news, I suppose, from Boris, just to finish it up, is that I think the public will probably welcome him back in after his prison sentence, which probably won't be nearly as long as is being reported in the papers before he's actually back out of prison again. Boris has always had this kind of bad boy persona, image, wives and mistresses and stories and tawdry tabloid gossip has very much played into the building of that persona. If anything, the book will sell out even faster when he comes out of prison, and it makes it 2 great chapters in the autobiography.
Yeah, 2 or more chapters. Thank you for that, Thomas. Badisha, you were nodding along to some of that, but I'm not going to get your opinions on it because I do want to keep us moving on. I'm going to look at the front page of the Daily Express, which kind of complete flip side of what we're talking about with Boris Becker there. Look at the headline, if we can bring it up on our screen for our viewers. What Britain really cares about. There is a picture of Boris there on the front page, but this is all about the cost of living, Badisha, isn't it?
Yes, so this is not about the lives of the rich and the famous and having the luxury to misspend your squazillions of pounds and dollars and euros from your glittering athletic career. This is about ordinary people who are being door-stopped in the run-up to the local elections, which, as we all know, are running on Thursday. And so, of course, the local candidates, we've already had 2 rounds asking us quite desperately which one we're going to vote for, because the Tories are just 3 points behind Labour, so everything hangs in the balance. And they're asking ordinary people in this poll exactly what they care about. What do ordinary voters care about? Oddly enough, the shenanigans with the leading MPs, including our Prime Minister, completely flouting their own COVID regulations, there is widespread outrage about that. But just in terms of the upcoming elections, it's quite far down the list. People are extremely concerned about the rising cost of living, rising energy prices, fuel prices, rising food prices, going to the shops and finding that the things that they ordinarily buy are either not there or very, very expensive. There's a huge amount of accumulated anxiety, obviously from the pandemic of the last 2 years, related to NHS backlogs, related to the drop-off in adequate care for long-term conditions which are not to do directly with COVID, but might be to do with, for example, long-term palliative care, cancer care. A lot of concern about the climate crisis, which is beginning to bite. And then also a lot of generalized anxiety around the invasion of Ukraine, around equality and social mobility. So those are the things that both main parties, in fact, have to get themselves geared up to address in the next, 3 working days, Tuesday,
yeah.
Wednesday, and Thursday?
It's not long for them to try and address those, and some of them are really important and kind of existential. And speaking of which, let's look at the front page of the Telegraph. This is one of yours, Thomas. This is just below the fold on the front page of the Telegraph this morning, saying that the Western officials are fearing that President Putin, rather than stop his invasion on Victory Day on the 9th of May, is actually going to declare all-out war on that day. I mean, Lemonek.
Yeah, I mean, you get the distinct impression over the last couple of weeks that the balance of power in Ukraine has changed pretty drastically. The unexpected resilience, as well as sort of training and equipment from NATO and the West of the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian people, pushing back quite a lot of that Russian advancement. A military that for years has been talked about in Europe and feared in Europe, really not making as much headway as they might have expected to do so. Plus, of course, Boris taking a return to Kiev, world leaders getting back into Kiev, the UK embassy, is setting up in Kiev again. So all of that seems to suggest anyway that, the balance of power is changing quite drastically. But it's really important here, and this article makes it clear that the West can't get complacent. This brings home Russia and Putin can actually be more dangerous the less that they have to lose. So there's a source here saying that Putin may use the May the 9th Victory Day parade in Russia to move what is currently being called this special operation in the Donbass region to an all-out war in Ukraine. Sources here saying that military intelligence and chiefs in the military are furious about what is essentially humiliation of the Russian military, particularly in some of those western parts of Ukraine where they've just been unable to make much headway at all. The problem for Putin here, and the reason the West needs to be careful, is that when you're an ascending power, when you're rising, and indeed when an invasion is going well for you, you have quite a lot to lose. That is no longer the case for Putin. His economy is crippled. His military is not doing nearly as well as he thought. He's probably facing quite a lot of not only domestic opposition, but opposition within his own circles. And that's when individuals and world leaders become at their most dangerous. He is very well aware of the fact that he, at least should not, and likely will never be welcomed back onto the international stage. And indeed, I think next time, there's what has the ostensible look of elections in Russia, they'll be much more difficult for him than they have been in the past. So all of that is indicative of desperation, and actually the West needs to be really careful that we don't move into this complacent mode. And the conflict in Ukraine will be long and it will be drawn out, but the support from the West needs to be consistent, because when you have less to lose, it becomes all the more dangerous.
It certainly does. Okay, Thomas, thank you for that. Bidisha as well, thank you. We're going to pause it there, but you're going to stay with us throughout the morning because we've got plenty more to look through in the newspapers throughout the day. All right, that's it from this hour on Sky News Breakfast. We've got plenty more to come for you throughout the morning. We'll have more news on the Conservative MP who's been suspended from the party, who's been accused of watching pornography in Parliament. I'll be joined by the Home Office Minister, Rachel Maclean, later.